Welcome to another episode of Chaos Daily. This is the chaotic sports show where we just cover one particular topic in depth I try to do it under 5 minutes, guys, but hey, I got a lot to say. So you can find us at Chaotic Sports on Twitter. You can also find me personally at Chris Sarda on Twitter and Instagram. We also have another website going on in this little group called Not Part of Your Scene. You can find that on YouTube. You can also go down here and subscribe and hit the little bell to get notifications. Today, what we're going to talk about is mostly a good thing in my mind as a country, but sometimes it can get confusing when you do it in American sports. And that's our asphyxiation with individuality. We always want a person versus another person. We always want it to be, no matter what the mitigating circumstances are, we always want it to be this guy versus that guy, whether it's football or baseball or basketball. And sometimes it makes sense. For example, on Saturday, Daniel Cormier versus Derek Lewis. It was a guy versus another guy. We all understood the rule set, and they went into a cage and they fought each other. There was no other mitigating circumstances. There was no, sometimes there is, right? Sometimes the referee can get involved or there's bad judging, but for the most part, especially if it's a finish, there's no handicap or magic bonus or something falls from the sky and it could hit Daniel Cormier, it could hit Derek Lewis. No, we found out who was the best that day, especially when there's a finish. And it can get murky, like I said, referees, judging, even when two people are so close in skill and have so much respect for each other's skill that it just ends in a close fight. The big fight recently, Canelo Alvarez versus Gennady Golovkin. That was really close. They gave it to Alvarez, but I'm not sure. It was close, and there wasn't a finish. And so, obviously, that's where individuality and him versus him works. The only time it doesn't in those sports is in time. We could say that, Vitor Belfort in his heyday could have beaten this guy or this guy, but he was just older. Now that we see over the past few years, we see that, okay, we thought Anderson Silva was the top of the line when he lost to Chris Weidman, but turns out he was probably declining then, and Chris Weidman's 1-5 in his last 6 fights or something. So we could make adjustments for time and age and stuff. But somewhere where we insist on doing it is for one, baseball, pitcher versus pitcher. When we see two big pitchers, we act like they're dueling against each other when really they're dueling against each other's team's batters. And that works great. Over time, maybe we can see some kind of change, some kind of issue with how someone pitches or against certain kinds of batters. But really, if you got a bunch of home run hitters, if you got a better manager, if you got a manager that's making better decisions across from you, you're not going to make it. And I know that a lot of you know I'm a Dodger fan, and I'm not making excuses there for Clayton Kershaw because he had 2 opportunities and a rookie pitched great against that team and ended up not getting a result from it because of a manager's decision. So this is not a defense of Clayton Kershaw, but this is just pointing out that, hey, a pitcher is an example where that doesn't work, yet we still talk about it. One where it gets a little murky is in the NBA. Now, you can have, let's say, James Harden versus Victor Oladipo, and they're both shooting guards. They're probably going to cover each other. And at the end of the day, you could sort of get a net number. It's still murky because we know who James Harden is. We know James Harden is going to score a lot of points, and he's not great at defense, so you're probably going to score a lot of points. But at least you get a net number there. Kawhi Leonard at his position, he might only have 20 points at the end of the game, but the all-star he's covering is only going to have 10, probably committed 3 turnovers. So that one's a little better, but it still gets murky because in basketball, there's still a lot of mitigating circumstances. There's still other players on the court that you can be passing to. There are other players that can become the focus because that matchup is so close, but it's a lot closer. Do you know where it's nowhere near close to decide to do a him versus him is in the NFL. And all week, I've had to deal with Michael Jordan commercials talking about the GOAT having, with them selling, and I understand it's the marketing department, them selling Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers. And they'll never be on the field together. There's no chance. Quarterbacks don't play special teams. That's about the only chance that they have. And all I heard was Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers. And they were both being the greats that they are by talking about how great one another were, how great they each other were, and their strengths. And it's very obvious that it's a hard discussion anyway, who the GOAT is, because you can give the 5 rings argument, but I can give the team argument. You can give the best player on the field argument, but Tom Brady still executes. Rodgers does it off of broken plays, it seems. Tom Brady seems to cut up your defense before it starts. So, not that Rodgers can't do that, and Tom Brady's had his share of broken plays too. So, where in this do we get Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers? It just doesn't happen. We don't put them in the octagon, and even if we did, we wouldn't know who the better quarterback was by facing them off together. So, Aaron Rodgers had a pretty good game, but he was up against a better team, and a team that really capitalized on the Packers' mistakes at the end of the game. And I'll have to admit, the Packers played better than I thought they would. The team around Aaron Rodgers played much better until the Aaron Jones fumble, which was disappointing. But the problem is that other side with the coaches and the offensive coach that should be a head coach and one of the greatest players of all time as quarterback, you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And after scoring on that Aaron Jones touchdown and then having an immediate other score with Josh Gordon, which was an embarrassing move by a young secondary with a player that was already kicked out for a stupid reason, you got the score I expected. To be honest, I expected maybe 14 more points, maybe 7 more for New England and 7 more for the Packers. But I didn't think the Packers were going to have more than 24 to 27 points in this game, and they ended up with far less because of an Aaron Jones fumble and because of the way they opened up the game. They didn't play great opening up the game. But nowhere in this do we see Brady versus Aaron Rodgers any more than we see Brady versus Aaron Rodgers when they're playing other teams in separate weeks in separate cities. If you want, there's 2 ways to decide the best quarterback. And stop telling me about rings, because that's a team sport. You tell me how Warren Moon or Aaron Rodgers or a number of other players would play in Brady's place on that team and how many rings they would have. It would probably be very similar amount of rings, especially if the quarterback's obedient like Tom Brady. Until recently, he hasn't been. But there's 2 ways to figure out who the best quarterback is. You take number 1, you decide how well will this team play without the quarterback. So we have information about that for Aaron Rodgers because he's been hurt over the last 4 years. He's missed significant games. We have 1 year of Tom Brady being hurt, and then a few games of him being suspended. And then we have Peyton Manning's last year on the Colts, where they were a Super Bowl team, and then they were, they got Andrew Luck first round. So that's one way. And you make your own decisions, we can argue, but that's one way. The second way is, and it's not as good, but is what you do when 2 boxers are going to fight. You go take a look at like opponents, and that'll actually be a big project because you want to take like opponents in the same year, and you want to make sure that there's not some big defensive player gone. If Tom Brady had to play the Raiders, if they were good, the Raiders 3 years ago with Khalil Mack, and later in the season Aaron Rodgers played the Raiders but Khalil Mack was hurt, then that shouldn't count so much. But you want to take like opponents, similar opponents, and see how each one does against each. But you still have a situation where the offenses could be better or good. In the case of Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers, they often make mediocre to slightly above average receivers much better. So I wouldn't do that for Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. Peyton Manning, maybe. He had Marvin Harrison. He had some great receivers. But for Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, if we can get a group of like games against the same team in the same year without any big injuries, you'd really see how well each one did. But then you could still talk about receivers. You could talk about big drops that weren't their fault. The biggest thing you could talk about is coaching. And that'll always be on Tom Brady's shoulders for his GOAT argument, is that you are the greatest of all time, but you're also coached by the greatest of all time. That's it for me. Remember, you can find us at Chaotic Sports on Twitter. You can find me at Chris Ard on Twitter and Instagram. Please subscribe, comment below. You think I'm crazy? Go onto YouTube, comment. You're not going to say anything new on YouTube. Everyone's crazy. Thank you guys for watching. This has been Chaotic Sports, Chaos Daily.